Let's talk about the future of Victor Oladipo and the Indiana Pacers. What's going on? My name is Sam Teets, everybody, and today I want to talk about a topic I've had in my mind for a little while now: the future of Victor Oladipo and the Indiana Pacers. Now, this video is going to mainly focus on Oladipo and what the Pacers might do with him moving forward. I think it's been pretty clear now, after the past couple of years, that Oladipo's future is not set in Indiana. I wouldn't be shocked if the team moves on from him at some point this offseason, tries to trade him away. Obviously, they can't cut him some salary, but I would think they would try to move on from him at some point, get out from underneath that contract he has. And when they bring in the new head coach, they just look towards building around Sabonis instead of Oladipo. A quick recap of what Victor Oladipo has gone through in his NBA career. He started off in Orlando, had a couple of really good years there. Then they traded him to the Oklahoma City Thunder for Serge Ibaka at the time. And Oladipo signed a 4-year, $85 million extension with Thunder, but it didn't work out with Russell Westbrook. So they ended up trading him later on, along with Domantas Sabonis, to Indiana, where they played for the Pacers. Paul George went in that deal to OKC, and he obviously didn't stay there very long. And it looked like initially Indiana actually won the deal because Sabonis made the All-Star game this year. And at the time, Oladipo was an All-Star and an All-Defensive player. Because in his first year with the Pacers, he made the leap that everyone kind of expected to make in OKC. At the time, he was only 25 years old. He scored over 1,700 points. He led the NBA with 177 steals. He was an all-star. He was an all-NBA third-team player. He was all-defensive first team. He was the most improved player in the NBA. So there were great expectations for him moving forward. Unfortunately for Oladipo, he suffered a ruptured right quad tendon against the Toronto Raptors in the 2018 season. It was in January when this happened. So he missed a good stretch of the year for them. He already missed a couple of games earlier in the season. And then this past year, he just couldn't stay healthy, couldn't get on the court. He only appeared in 19 regular season games. He played in all 4 playoff games, but didn't really make a large impact there. Indiana got swept, got kicked out of the playoffs. Nate McMillan got fired. And Oladipo just never looked right this year. He set career lows in field goal percentage, 3-point percentage, assists per game, steals per game. He did not look like the former All-Star we're used to seeing. And at this point, it's worth wondering. It's been almost, I guess you said, 2 years now since he's had fully healthy kind of stretch. So at what point is he a liability, and what point do you want to move on from him? I think the answer for Indiana right now is move on from him this offseason, because you bring in new head coach Sabonis, who missed most of the playoffs for them. He seems like a guy for the future, so why not ride with him and try to get out from under Victor Oladipo's contract? You're already working to sign Sabonis to a large deal. Malcolm Brogdon has a large contract. Miles Turner has a large contract. Do not keep Oladipo around if you're only expecting him to be available for 20 games during the season and continue to struggle with rehab and getting back into the NBA form. Now, according to Spotrac, Oladipo is the 9th highest paid shooting guard in terms of annual salary. And I'm sure when he becomes a free agent, he'll want to make more than that. He'll want to be paid probably closer to a top 5 shooting guard. Of course, now that could all change because of the health issues. So I'm not saying he deserves to be paid like a top 5 guy, because right now, obviously, he's not playing like one. He has not been healthy enough to play like one. But I would think that from a player perspective, you would try to go out there and get the maximum value you could. Oladipo is still only, I think, 28 years old. So he's going to want to go out there and get a maybe not a long-term deal, maybe a short-term deal initially to prove that he can still play. But he's going to want a massive contract at some point. And if you're Indiana, you do not want to be the one paying that. And as you can see from his contract, Oladipo has 1 more year left. So it's almost time for Indiana to make a move. If you don't make a move this offseason, you risk losing him for nothing. Which at some point, it's probably not the worst thing that could happen, because he's been injured so much. Again, when he's healthy, he's an all-NBA caliber player, a great defender. He's someone you want on your team. But he hasn't been healthy in 2 years. So at some point, you have to move on from this and just understand that maybe we can't get something from him. But if we can get something for Victor Oladipo at this point, we need to do it now, or we're not going to get anything at all. So that would be the move I would anticipate. And again, if we're looking at the top paid shooting guards in the league, Victor Oladipo down at 9, making just over $21 million a year. And some of the guys in front of him, like Nick Batum, making $24 million. Obviously, even the injured Victor Oladipo probably deserves to be paid more than Nick Batum. No offense to him. He's a phenomenal player. They're all phenomenal players in the NBA, but obviously Oladipo much higher ceiling than someone like Batum. The other players up there, Bradley Beal, understandable. CJ McCollum, not an all-star, Doesn't have the same ceiling as someone like Victor Oladipo, but at the same point, much more consistent because he's been healthy. DeMar DeRozan, Devin Booker, Jimmy Butler, Klay Thompson, James Harden, those are all understandable. Well, Harden's making about over $42 million per year, while meanwhile Victor Oladipo is making $21 million. So it's a massive difference there. He's making almost double the amount Victor Oladipo is. Even guys like Klay Thompson, 37, close to 38 million. Jimmy Butler, about 35 million. Devin Booker, 31 million. $10 million more than Victor Oladipo. So I would assume he wants to close that gap as long as teams view him still as a player who's worth that kind of money. So I got busy looking at the ESPN trade machine. I was trying to figure out what makes sense here, or really what's possible, not necessarily what makes sense, because a lot of teams I put in the machine probably wouldn't want to trade for Victor Oladipo because of the injuries. But at the same point, I wanted to see just what was possible. Financially, what could work here? What could Indiana do? And again, some of these moves for Indiana are not necessarily about getting better so much as they are about just getting something in return and maybe getting some salary off the books. Now, one trade that could work, I don't know if the team will go for it. The Miami Heat could technically trade Andre Iguodala for Victor Oladipo. And I assume there would be some draft picks in there as well. Of course, the trade machine, I only had the players moving here, but I would assume Indiana would get maybe a draft pick along with that, maybe a second rounder, maybe 2 second rounders. But this is financially possible. I think at this point, Oladipo offers more upside than Iguodala. Iguodala is much older. He's not the same guy who won the NBA Finals MVP a couple of years ago. But he is more available than Victor Oladipo, who sometimes just can't even play for a full season. So I would assume that Miami would be more interested in maybe holding Iguodala, maybe holding on to some of their guys, keeping the rotation they have currently because of how well it worked this year. They're in the Eastern Conference Finals. I would assume they would want to keep that around. So I don't know if this is an option for them, but at the same point, Pat Riley loves to make trades, loves to make moves, to try to bring more stars. So I wouldn't rule this out entirely. From a team that's competing to a team that is not competing, the Atlanta Hawks are always just an interesting team for me. They've got a group of good young players, but at the same point, they just don't know how to win. They haven't been winning. Trae Young puts up some of the best numbers in the league, but at the same point, they're not a winning team. John Collins' numbers look impressive, but really, he's kind of stuck between the power forward and the center spot. So I'd be interested to see what the Hawks do to try to turn this all around. And one move they could make is trade a bunch of players for Victor Oladipo. And Dwayne Dedmon at center really wasn't playing a lot for them towards the end of last year, especially with Clint Capella coming on board. So they really don't need Dwayne Dedmon in my mind. You can move him. I put Cam Reddish there. You don't necessarily need to trade Cam Reddish because you still believe that he could develop into a really good player, which I think he could. You put Kevin Huerter in there too. I don't know that they want to trade him either, though. But the point is you're going to have to part with someone. If you don't, you could always go out and just sign someone in free agency and then kind of move on from the same point. You know, they've got the free agents and the cap space in the room that they could do that. They could get someone and then trade them eventually for Victor Oladipo. But there's an option here to get Oladipo. I think pairing someone like that with Trae Young, or you got John Collins and Clint Capella underneath, could really help them out in terms of playmaking, in terms of spacing the floor a little bit. And also defensively, Victor Oladipo gets back to what he was when he was 25 years old. The issue would be, once again, is you're sending multiple pieces who are contributors away. In this case, 2 pieces who are really, I could think you could say, are important to Indiana for a player who might not play. And it always comes back to health. If there's going to be a trade for Victor Oladipo, it's going to come down to what is he physically right now and what can he get back to. Because the idea that he'll get back to 100% of what he used to be, it's kind of like the same idea that John Wall will get back to 100% of what he used to be. It, in theory, is a great idea, and we hope it's true. But we've seen so many times over and over again that just has never happened. Another trade that should anger some Philly fans, I thought, why not try to get him to the 76ers? And you know what? It's really not a bad deal. If you're the 76ers, based on what happened this past season and how much Al Horford kind of, I don't want to say messed with the team chemistry because there was already issues there, but at the same point, he didn't really fit with the team. And he's on a massive contract. And honestly, at this point, if you're the 76ers, taking on anyone to get rid of that contract is probably worthwhile. The issue with this trade here is I don't know that the Pacers would bite on it. They already have Miles Turner. They already have Sabonis. You really don't need to bring in Al Horford because the same thing will happen in Philadelphia. You'll have basically too many bigs, too many guys who are not able to operate in the same offense. That would be my concern here with bringing on Al Horford if you're Indiana. But at the same point, if you're Philadelphia, get Victor Oladipo, get TJ Leaf. That's some depth there. And you already have Josh Richardson playing shooting guard, so you don't necessarily need another guy out there. But at the same point, like I said, getting rid of Al Horford's salary to bring in someone, especially Oladipo, who will be playing on an expiring contract. I think that's a much more advantageous situation than continuing to keep Horford on the roster. So Mike D'Antoni is not returning as the Houston Rockets head coach next year. It'll be just interesting to see what moves they make this offseason, but a couple of guys could be on the chopping block, a couple of guys could be sent away. Obviously, you have James Harden, the best shooting guard in the game right now. You've got Russell Westbrook, and I would assume that you're not going to break that duo up just yet. Although I wouldn't rule it out in the future, but right now I'd assume you keep those two together. They could make a move here and potentially get Victor Oladipo. It would take Eric Gordon, who didn't really shoot well in the playoffs. He had some struggles in the bubble. In the past, he's been very good, but not in the bubble. And you got Mute, who could potentially be moved as well. He really didn't contribute that much this year. So you pair those two up, you send them to Indiana. You can get Victor Oladipo. Now, again, would he work with Harden on the floor? I don't really know. Would he be able to work with Russell Westbrook on the floor? I don't really know. Would he even be on the floor because of injuries? It's another question. There's a lot of question marks here. But what we do know is Houston's current formula and Houston's current roster is not working. So they'll need to make some moves here. Would I see Indiana necessarily bite on the trade for Gordon? I don't really know. I don't think that would be the most advantageous move for them. But at the same point, Houston, I mean, they should be open to trying anything at this point because what they've been doing so far has not been working. This is a trade I fully do not expect to happen. I think it would be actually probably a bad move for Denver, but Denver could technically send Gary Harris to Indiana for Victor Oladipo. Harris never really developed into the scorer we anticipated he would be. He's more of a defensive specialist at this point. Not much of a contributor on the offense. Can he get hot in some certain nights? Yes, he can, but he's not necessarily an impact player every single night. But he's still good defensively. Victor Oladipo, like we said, the injuries has kind of sapped his defensive play. Offensively, he's been very inefficient recently. So I would not say this is the best move for Denver, considering they're in the Western Conference Finals that got this far with their current roster. I don't know if you want to necessarily move on from Gary Harris to get a guy who might only play 20 to 30 games a year. But there's a possibility that this could happen. Like I said, not my favorite trade. I wouldn't do it, but there's potential. The rumor has it the Brooklyn Nets are going to be coached by Steve Nash next year. They're going to have Kyrie Irving back. They're going to have KD back. Rumor has it that they're going to try to put something together for Drew Holiday from the Pelicans. So if they can do that, obviously you would want to make that move before getting Victor Oladipo. But if nothing works out and you feel like you still need that shooting guard, you could make a move for Victor Oladipo. It would take Spencer Dinwiddie and it would take Lance Thomas, but you could get Victor Oladipo fairly easily. I think Dinwiddie, it's not an ideal move for Indiana necessarily, but at this point, like I said, if you throw in maybe Dinwiddie some draft picks, I think they would take that because they're hitting a reset button with the coaching staff. And I think it's more of Sabonis' team down than Victor Oladipo's, and they really want to get something for him before he leaves. The problem with the Nets would be Dinwiddie's been a really good player for them, coming off the bench and helping them out in different situations, moving in times into the starting lineup for rotations because of injuries. And Oladipo is highly injury prone. Kyrie Irving's been injured in the past couple of years. KD obviously missed the entire season. So you've got a lot of injury players, a lot of injured superstars stacking up there on that roster. I'd be worried about that. If you're going to make the move for Victor Oladipo, which is why Drew Holiday would be a much better piece, I think, in my mind, to add than Victor Oladipo at this point. But at the same time, if you want that third guy who could potentially be a really good player for you, Oladipo might be worth taking a shot on, especially if you're getting Kevin Durant back. And Kevin Durant, if he's even 80% or 85% of the Kevin Durant we saw with Golden State, he would still probably be able to afford to lose Dinwiddie and still have an offensive produce on a high level and win enough games to make the playoffs with a top 4 seed. So I've thrown a bunch of potential trade ideas for Victor Oladipo, none of which really benefit Indiana all that much other than they might get some draft picks in return. They might get a role player and maybe just get Victor Oladipo's salary off the books. But at the same point, I think this is where Indiana is at this time. They're getting a new head coach. They have some good pieces there, but they probably don't have enough to compete for a championship. And you're not going to get the superstar who's going to take you over the top in the next 2 years. It's just not going to happen. Unless you draft the next Luka Doncic, you're not going to have a team that's able to compete with Milwaukee or a team that's going to be able to compete with Boston and be able to play at a high level where they maybe can make a conference finals and maybe even get to the championship. I don't see that in the future for Indiana unless they make some serious roster moves, which could include, in the short term, getting rid of Victor Oladipo and just trying to build something new here. I think Oladipo, like I said, at his peak, is a phenomenal player, top 20, probably top 15 player when fully healthy because he's got that defensive element to his game. but he hasn't been that player in about a year and a half to 2 years. So at this point, you need to look forward and try to get as much as you can for Victor Oladipo. And if you're a team looking to compete for a championship or just looking to try to build some stability in the young core, maybe you make that move to get Oladipo, and maybe you see if he can be a fit for your team.